everyone. Welcome to this webinar about diving into Heroku Private Spaces. I'm James Ward from Salesforce, and we also have with us Matt Krieger from Heroku. You want to say hi, Matt?
Hey, Matt. How's it going, folks? I'm Matt Krieger. I'm responsible for developer advocacy at Heroku.
Great, and I am a platform evangelist at Salesforce. So this webinar today is being recorded, and so you can get that later. We'll send you a link to that. We'll go through a couple logistics here before we dive in. So first, as you all are probably familiar with the forward-looking statement, this is us just saying that don't take anything we say in this webinar and make purchasing decisions based on it. Talk with your account representatives and make sure you review that statement and understand it. All right, so there's many different ways for you to go social with us, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and those are the Salesforce developer channels. Of course, there's also similar ones for Heroku, which is very easy to remember. It's just Heroku on basically all those same channels. So, so that'd be a great way to get engaged and get to know us and ask us questions and those sorts of things going forward. If you do have questions during this webinar, you can ask them throughout. We'll be monitoring those questions and may take some during, but we'll definitely leave time at the end for some Q&A. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to first dive into Heroku Enterprise and Private Spaces, and we want to do that with live demos. Heroku is a great way to, it's a great product just to see and use. So we're actually going to dive right into some demos with Matt, walk through that. If you're not familiar with Heroku, that's okay, because we'll kind of start from the basics and then work through Heroku Enterprise and then get to the new Private Spaces. So we'll be walking through all that, and then we'll come back to some slides and recap some of that, and then I'll dive into talking about integrating Salesforce and Heroku, and talk about Private Spaces and how it helps us do that, and then we'll have Q&A. So that's our agenda for today. Thank you for joining. Okay, so I want to actually just hand it over to Matt. We're going to dive right into some Heroku basics and have him walk us through that. So hang with me for a second while I give him control of the screen.
Control. Thank you. There we go. All right, perfect. Everyone see my screen okay? James, I guess you're going to have to...
I'm seeing it. Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Heroku. What is Heroku? Well, Heroku is a platform as a service, and what makes it really special is that it's built by developers for developers. Well, what does that really mean? Everybody says that. We care about all the same interfaces that you care about. We care about the dashboard, of course, but that's what we're looking at right now. And one of the things that you might notice about the dashboard is it doesn't show us servers. It doesn't show, there's no buttons to push. It's telling us about our applications. So Heroku is an application-centric platform. The dashboard isn't the only thing we care about. Of course, we care about the command line interface, and we have something called the Heroku tool belt that works with basically every modern operating system, all the Unix, Mac, Windows, whatever you prefer. And of course, we have a platform API. So everything that I'm about to show you, you can either do from the CLI, you can do from the dashboard, or you can use the platform API. We support practically every modern language. You can see on my dashboard right now, we have a Java application here and a PHP application. We're in multiple regions, so you can deploy an application to the US or to EU, and once we start to get into private spaces, you'll see that now with private spaces, you can deploy into regions all over the world, which we're going to do in a few minutes. Okay, so that's Heroku. Why are people using it? Well, before I get to that, why don't we talk about who's using it? I picked a couple of favorites. Macy's, pretty appropriate for a conversation about Heroku Enterprise. If you're in this picture for a moment that you're a developer at Macy's, and the holidays, we've just passed it, but as it approaches, you're starting to have these sleepless nights. You know that your the volume of traffic that your web application receives is about to hit the roof. And one of my favorite quotes from a VP at Macy's was that Heroku gave him his first good night's sleep on Boxing Eve. What's the day before Boxing Day? Boxing Eve, maybe? So Macy's, great product, great application, and again, running on Heroku. Just some sort of fun ones. I know we've got a lot of developers on the line, and if this then that, it's a lot of fun if you're a developer. It takes this idea of cause and effect. So, for example, the recipe that's showing here is if you post something on Instagram, then it gets stored in Dropbox. And all of these recipes are running on Heroku, and of course, if you're if this then that, and your target audience isn't just developers, but obviously includes developers, then you need to be constantly publishing new features. And so Heroku wants to make it really simple for you, not to just deploy your application, but to update it, to add features to it. And then just a little favorite of mine, Elo. It's this new social network. It's really focused on designers. That's why every picture on this page is better than anything I could ever take. And what's cool about Elo is last year they launched a new mobile application. Heroku is a platform that supports mobile applications and web applications. We've even got malls who have these huge panels and displays that run on Heroku. And Elo at one point was adding 25,000 users an hour to their social network. And it wasn't something they needed to think about. Heroku just made that dead simple. So kind of an idea of who's using Heroku. And there's a lot more. You could go to heroku.com/customers, and there's a bunch there. Alrighty, so it wouldn't be built by developers for developers if we didn't give you a way to collaborate. How did I see this? How did I forget to close HipChat, James? Terrible, amateur move. So
we knew that was going to happen.
We knew it was going to happen, and it had to be me, right? So we wouldn't be building this thing for developers if we didn't give you a way to collaborate. And of course, developers today are quite often collaborating on GitHub. And so that's where we're going to start. You might be starting on your local machine. A lot of great applications are born in somebody's garage while they're hacking on their dev machine. But in this case, we're going to start with this little app called Jog that I have on GitHub, and you can find it at mattkrieger.com/jog, and it's got this little Heroku button that you could use to deploy it if you wanted to. But let's do that together right now. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to our Heroku dashboard. We're going to go to this DevRel organization that I set up. And this little plus button, and again, keep in mind you could do this from your CLI if you're more comfortable there, from the dashboard, or using the platform API. And I just hit the little plus sign over there. And we don't have to put it in an organization. Organizations are a feature of Heroku Enterprise that let you collect together applications and teams of users and give them permissions that sort of make sense for your organization. Okay, so let's call this thing Jog Staging because it's going to be a staging application. And you might notice here that we can put this in the common runtime or in a private space. But for now, because this is a staging application, I'm going to put it in a common runtime, and I'm going to let it run in the US. Okay, so let's create an app. So here's the dashboard for this specific application. You can see Jog Staging over here. This little star just puts it over on the left-hand side. And now we can pick our deployment method. So I mentioned that this application is running on GitHub, so I'm going to go to GitHub, and if I hadn't connected this application to GitHub at this point, it would ask me to. Now you can see here I could deploy from Dropbox if I wanted to. I could deploy just using Git, but we're going to use GitHub because GitHub is fantastic. So I'm searching for that, or sorry, I don't need to call it staging. That's what our app is called, not what our repo is called. So here's that application that we have in the other tab. So this is the application, or sorry, the repo that we're going to connect. So there we are, we've connected it. And now we're going to do a couple of things here. We don't want people to have to come to this application every time they deploy to GitHub. We want to continuously be deploying this app to Heroku. And so we're going to enable automatic deploys. And if we wanted to, we can have a continuous integration system and run things like tests before it's deployed. But this is a staging environment, so it's okay to skip that for now. And then we're going to enable review apps. Now, review apps are a really great feature of Heroku. When you're collaborating on an application, a lot of the times your teams are centralized around these new features that they're working on. And GitHub has this concept of a pull request. And a pull request is simply a set of changes that you think should be on their way to production. And so what a review app does is it lets you as a team, not just the people who are technical, but your product managers and your other managers, see what features you're working on in an application that's just like your staging environment. So it gives your pull requests their very own apps. So we're going to enable that. And then we're going to create new review apps whenever somebody opens a pull request. All right, last thing we need to do, we kind of need to prime the pump here. We're going to deploy our GitHub branch. So let's deploy that. All right. So this is where some of the magic happens. Now, what Heroku's doing is it's figuring out what kind of application this is. And this is a Node app, but it doesn't really matter what language it's written in. It's a Node application, and Node applications and Python applications and Ruby applications. They have these things called dependency manifests. In Heroku, or sorry, in Node land, it's called a package.json. You can see that here. And so what makes the package.json special is it tells us what everything that our application needs is in there. And so Heroku detects that, it knows this application has been written in JavaScript and is running in Node on the server, and we set the environment up for it. So that's all we have to do. At this point, our application is building. It's out of our hands. You can see these are some native dependencies being built. They're not a problem either. And one of the cool things is that the first deploy takes the longest because we are installing all of these dependencies for the first time. But after that, we're going to cache them, so the next time that we do a deploy, it's going to be much faster because we have those dependencies on hand, and if they haven't changed, we can just use the ones we already installed. Okay, so this is almost done.
26 megs, you couldn't get that with a Java application.
I have been trying to woo you away for Java for a long time.
All the apps I deploy are like 200 megs.
Go is even faster. You deploy a Go app on this thing, and it's like, I mean, you can't even see it flash by. I can't use Go apps because I can't explain what's happening fast enough. So here's our application, and now you might have figured out why it's called Jog. It's GIF or GIF. We're going to end the age-old debate about how you pronounce it. And if you text something in right now, it'll pop up. But maybe, or if you came to jog-staging.herokuapp.com, you would see this page. This is live. It's online. It's got its own URL. Now, I'm not going to hang out and wait for you to start texting stuff in because we've got a lot to cover in the next half an hour or so. But let's go back to our application for a second. So this is pretty cool, right? We just set an application up. We deployed it from GitHub. And now anything that we merge into master on GitHub was automatically going to be deployed to our staging environment. This is a great workflow if you're one person or you're two people or you're a really small team. But this is a webinar about the enterprise, and the enterprise has large teams and complex applications. And so what we need to do is we need to set up a pipeline for our application so we can understand what features we have in flight, what staging environments we have, and what production environments we have. And guess what? Those production environments are going to be located all over the world in private spaces. So let's create a new pipeline, and yeah, we can call it Jog. And so the pipeline is going to allow us to visualize our continuous delivery flow. Now, check this out. This is that Jog staging app that we just deployed, and it's plopped it into the staging stage because staging stage, that's a mouthful, but it's plopped it into the staging stage because it ends in staging. It figured out where that belonged. And then we have this review app section over here, which we set up but we haven't used yet, and we have this production set up over here. And we're going to get to the production stuff. We're going to talk a lot about private spaces, but really what makes private spaces so special is that everything's special today. What makes private spaces so special is that it brings the Heroku developer experience to industries with the most strenuous requirements for trust and security. And so everything that I'm showing you is relevant regardless of whether you're using Heroku or private spaces. Okay, so the next thing that we might want to do if we're if this then that is we need to get a new version of our code base out there. We need to add a new feature. And I'm going to do this quickly now. We're going to go over to Jog. We're going to go to this public folder, and I'm sure you've seen a bit of HTML in your day. I'm going to edit this. And so we're just going to change this, this class that's on the body. Did I just delete this, or what did I do there? Yeah. You were worried I didn't notice that, didn't you? See, this is I've seen my fair share of HTML too. Okay, so we're going to create a new branch, and a pull request in GitHub is really just sugar around this concept of a branch. And Git is a distributed version control system. It's fantastic because it lets you keep track of what's changing in your application. And GitHub is awesome too because it lets you collaborate, and pull requests are a big part of that. So we're going to propose a file change. We've created a new branch, and that contains the change that we just made. And then we're going to open a pull request. And you can see these two things are very connected. We open a new pull request, and that's us really expressing our intent to have this change pushed to staging. So we'll create a pull request. And then check this out. Remember when we were setting up our application, we set it up so that it would automatically create review apps for us? See how this says Matt Krieger requested a deployment to Jog Staging PR34 just now. So that same process that we experienced when we deployed the application to staging is playing out again. And if we go back to our pipeline, we can see that. Here's that change in mid-flight. Now, again, if this was a big application in an enterprise environment, you probably have 20, 30 different changes in flight at any one time. And you might have many staging environments. You're definitely going to have lots of production environments. So let's see if we can open this app in another browser. And so right now that application has been created, and if we give it a couple more minutes, it'll have that change. So we're going to leave that behind for just a second. We're going to let that bake, and we're going to come over here to this production environment. Now don't forget about our, well, let's just see if this probably won't take very long. Oh, come on. So let's say, oh, people are voting. Thank you for voting. So let's say for a moment that we wanted to see how this application was behaving. Well, we could do that. We could click on it. We don't have to use the command line to grab logs. If we go, oh, I got to move this WebEx thing. If we go over here, we could get logs here, or we can see under this latest activity section that the build is in progress. So I started it less than a minute ago, and if we click View Build Process, hey, there's that process that you're already familiar with. Okay, it looks like it's successful. Now, keep in mind when you deploy to a review app, those dependencies aren't cached because, well, you're deploying a brand new application. Okay, so it's been deployed, and now if we go back to our pipeline, we can see that this was deployed less than a minute ago, and check out how integrated this is with GitHub. Like, we can see the SHA that we're on, we can see this is different than this one, and if we open this up in a browser, hey, look at this. And because we know which environment we're in, we can see that we're in a review app and which PR we're looking at. And it's got a different database, right? Because you don't want to have the same database in production that you have in staging, that you have in your development environments. So this has a different database, it's totally isolated, and it's all automated. And we set that all up like in the last 5 minutes. Pretty cool. All right, well, the natural conclusion here is that we take this change, we come back to our pull request, and check this out, like Matt Krieger deployed to jog staging, so now it's not being deployed, it has been deployed. And, you know, somebody would come along here, maybe it would be James, and he'd come and he'd give me like a thumbs up and be like, hey, dude, this looks good, you can merge it. So we'll merge that pull request in, and come back over to our pipeline for a second, and check that out. Our review app disappeared. It's gone. It only lived as long as our pull request did, and once that pull request was merged, the review app was cleaned up. So we don't have all these environments hanging around. We're not paying for them indefinitely. They're cleaned up for us. And now, because we set this application to be deployed whenever we merge into master, which is exactly what we just did, we have a new application being built. Except this time, it's going to happen much faster. All right, you're going to have to take my word for it. That change is on its way to staging. So, okay, private spaces. Take all these cool features and we bring them to these other industries that need trust, they need security. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to set up some production environments. Well, let's go to our organization for a second. And you can see I have a bunch of different applications here, and up here I have spaces. So these ones are on the shared runtime. These are things like staging environments, development or dev apps, and this little blue thing here indicates that it's in a space. So let's go over to spaces. And so what we're going to do, and James is going to go into a lot more detail about what a space is and why it's useful to you. I just want to give you an idea of the experience and show you how simple it is. So we're going to create a new space just like we created an app. We'll call this Jog US, and we'll set it up in Oregon because it takes a few minutes. There's a lot happening behind the surface here, but you can see we've got a few regions already: Frankfurt, Tokyo, Oregon, Virginia, and private space is just launched. It's brand new. So we're adding new regions all the time. So let's set it up in Virginia. We'll create a private space, and that's it. So now, hey, grab a coffee, come back in 8 minutes. Well, we've got people to see and things to do, so we can't wait. So I took the liberty of setting up a couple of production environments for us. Let's check out this one in Frankfurt. So now we're in a private space, and this doesn't look that different, right? All we have here is we have an application, and we could create a new one with this little plus sign over here, and we can see it's in a private space. And again, it's in a private space, so it's got its own network, and if we needed databases and things like that added to it, we could do that. All right. So let's go back to our pipeline. If I can remember where I put it. There it is. Okay, So let's go over to this production section, and let's go and find that environment in Frankfurt and that environment in Tokyo. And we can open one of these up. I had pushed this code to it a little bit earlier. So it's the old version of our application, and you can see that it's got a local number in Germany, and it's got a little German flag. And more importantly, the database that this application uses is Postgres. It uses Postgres and Redis, and both of those databases are also located with it in Germany, in Frankfurt. So very low latency between this application and its related databases. All right. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is we want to push our new change, and let's make sure our change made it to staging. I promised you it would, and here it is. So here's our staging application. And now what we're going to do is we're going to hit promote to production. And that's, now at this point we can compare on GitHub and say, hey, what's different about our staging application, our production application? Which commits do we have in between? But it's really as simple as hitting promote. And as you might have guessed, we could promote to one of these environments and try these changes out in Frankfurt or Tokyo, or we can roll it out to all of them, which is what I'm going to do here now. And of course, because I'm doing a demo, it has to throw an error at least once. Oh, but I can see that it is working. I'm refreshing, but
the demo gods.
Yeah, the demo gods have an attack. I think it's because I hit it twice. So here we go. So now it's saying promoting to production, and again, what you're going to notice here is that while these two applications do have a repository associated with them, we're not actually triggering a deploy directly from GitHub. And that's kind of a bad idea anyway, because that's a place that's got a lot of change and stuff associated with it. At this point, you could change permissions in your org. You could say only these people are able to promote to production, and it's that promotion to production that brings these new changes, which is, you know, somewhat of a high-risk activity to production. And now we can see that they were deployed less than a minute ago, and if we go ahead and open this one up in Frankfurt, and we go ahead and open this one up in Tokyo, here are those changes. You can see our little Tokyo flag, which is clearly evidence that it's running in Tokyo, and our German flag, again, evidence that it's running in Germany. So there you have it. That's Heroku pipelines, review apps, the Heroku developer experience, and it all builds up and works seamlessly with private spaces. So you have all these great features, and you're able to finally use them in your enterprise environment. I hope you're as excited about it as I am, and yeah, maybe I'll hand it off to James, so we can kind of unwind that story.
Back, a couple questions came in,
Sure.
and I want to walk you through answering those questions. So first, go into that jog staging app, the dashboard for that.
Let's check it out. Okay. Do you want to go to the deploy tab?
Go to the resources tab, actually.
Okay.
So there's a question about what services you can use with these Heroku apps. And so maybe talk a little bit about add-ons and provision some add-ons and stuff.
So, great idea. I'm glad you asked. I wasn't sure I'd get the opportunity to talk about this, but Heroku makes it really simple for you to extend your application with things like databases and logging solutions, and we do that through add-ons, which are these third-party services. Some of them are third-party, some of them are first-party, and you go shopping for these things in the Elements marketplace, and most of them, I say shopping, but most of them have a free tier because we want experimentation to be free. So here we are, elements.heroku.com/add-ons, and you can come and check this out, and there's just tons and tons of stuff here, everything from Amazon S3 for your images. If you want a graph database, that's available. You can see, oops, treasure data, all the different categories along the side here, things from user management to alerts and notifications, and all of these things are as easy to add to your application as coming to the resources page, searching for Postgres, and provisioning it. And you can see that the add-on scale with your application. So there we go. Now we've added Heroku Postgres to our app. And of course, your app needs a way to connect to that, and we do that through something called configuration bar. So if we go over to our settings tab, we reveal config bars, we can see that now we have this database URL. And so our application has that database, that URL made available to it, and of course it can use that to connect to Postgres. And these are really easy to set. Like if we wanted to do a node env, and we wanted to make it like staging, we could add that. And now our application knows that it's in staging, and once it's restarted, if we come back to, what was our staging, jockstaging.herokuapp.com?
Yeah.
We'll see now we have this environment staging thing at the top because it knows which environment it's in. So that's kind of config bars and add-ons. The two are fairly connected. Is there any other questions? Did anyone ask about
Yeah.
scale by chance?
Not about scale. We should show that. But before we do that, there was a question about how your review apps know what add-ons and resources they need so that they can be provisioned automatically like you should.
Oh, great question. Okay, so if we come back to GitHub for a second, because this is where our code base is, and this is where you should really specify what add-ons your application needs, you'll notice that we have this app.json file. This is just a meta file. It's really simple. It describes this application. It says, hey, jog, GIF, or GIF, which is it? And down at the bottom here, you'll notice that we have this add-on section. And the add-on section specifies that when this application is provisioned, it needs Redis and Postgres. And so that's set up as part of that provisioning process. Now, a couple other cool things here. You notice that it tells it which environment configuration vars it wants to pull in from its master application, the staging app. And so in this case, we're bringing in the app name, which is often useful. We're generating a little secret, and we're specifying that the environment is staging, because a review app is still a staging app. And you can pick and choose what you want to use. So if you're using external API keys, let's take, for example, let's say that you're integrating with GitHub in some way. Well, that's probably a token that you want to share between your review apps and your staging apps and maybe even your production apps, but databases certainly aren't. So that's how you specify them and why you would.
Nice. Yeah, and then since you mentioned it, maybe share the scaling part of that app as well.
Yeah. It's easy to forget because it's just so simple, but let's say we're Macy's and it's the night before Boxing Day, and we want to scale up to, 10 times our capacity. Well, we come to our resources tab, and we hit this little pen, which says we want to edit it, and we set up, 55 instances of this application. Somebody's going to be mad at me. And let's view the logs for a second. And now what you're going to see, if I haven't overwhelmed it with that, I'm probably not allowed to set up 55 spaces and this 55 new dynos in this space. No, it looks like it's working.
Sales associate.
Yeah. Somebody looked at it and was like, what's this person doing? So we'll set it to a much more rational 5, much more reasonable 5. But you absolutely can set it to 50 if your space is provisioned in such a way. But then you can check it out. Like now we have all of these new applications spinning up, all of these new instances of this application, all running in containers, totally isolated. And you can see this like web.2, web.5. And really what this does is it means that when somebody comes and visits jogstaging.herokuapp.com, their request might go to any one of those 5 instances of the application.
That's awesome that you can instantly scale up that application to as many dynos as you need to run it. Heroku also supports auto scaling, so you can have the application scaled automatically depending on the demand on the application, and that's done through a Heroku add-on. Of course, there are Heroku APIs underneath all this that you can use to control the Heroku management plane in really whatever way you want. So that will allow you the flexibility to build your scaling however you need it. So thanks, Matt, for going through all that. That looks really good. It's cool to see end-to-end everything that you can do with Heroku. Or maybe not everything, but a lot of the awesome features there of Heroku, from the basics of deployment to pipelines to Heroku Enterprise and organizations. So I want to walk through a little recap of everything that you've seen with a few slides. So, but first, let's talk about just in real basic terms, kind of going back to the beginning, what is Heroku and why you would want it. And to do that, I want to talk about some of my experience in the enterprise. When I worked in an enterprise company in the past, the infrastructure was something that I had to help manage, and so that meant that if a hard drive died in the middle of the night, I'd have to go down to the data center and fix that machine and get it up and running. And usually that meant that there was downtime on an application when that happened, so getting things up and running again was painful. And so having Heroku just manage that infrastructure for me makes it so I don't have to worry about the infrastructure. I don't have to worry that my app's going to keep running. Heroku is the one that wears the pager and makes sure that everything from the underlying infrastructure to the app actually making sure it's running, they manage all that for me. And then as you saw with the deployment on Heroku, In the past, what I've done is take a application and copy it to a server and shut down the server and start it back up. And the deployment pipeline on Heroku really simplifies the way of getting code to production, and makes it so that really anyone can do that deployment. It's a very simple and well documented process for how you do a deployment on Heroku. It's always the same, and so that makes it so it doesn't always come down to just one person having SSH keys and knowing how to do a deployment to a server. Now there's a very defined pipeline, as you saw, for how to get code through a pipeline and then to production. So what all this means is that we can focus on building our apps and not our ops, and that frees us up to be able to focus on what's important, which is delivering software for our users. And Heroku makes that really easy to do with the defined pipelines and the deployment infrastructure, the scaling infrastructure, all that stuff that they provide and manage for you.
So so with Heroku. Heroku is managing that infrastructure. They're managing and giving us a deploy process where it doesn't come down to one person knowing the SSH credentials to a server and knowing how to correctly do a deployment. It gives us a deployment pipeline that anyone can get familiar with in a few minutes, like Matt just showed us. So that's some of the big reasons why I started using Heroku even before I started working at Salesforce and Heroku, and it was definitely something that made it a lot easier for us to deliver our apps much more quickly. So that was my take on why Heroku. So now pipelines, quick review on that. The pipelines allow us to establish a continuous delivery pipeline, a way to move changes through a pipeline, test those changes, actually be able to see those changes with staging apps, being able to automatically deploy changes to staging environments so that we can make sure that as changes are being integrated together, that everything's working together nicely, and then do manual promotion to production. Of course, you could do automatic deployment to production if you have a really simple app that you don't need to worry about it having any downtime, or if you're really confident in your changes. But most of the time we do those manual promotions to production. Something that goes along with this is feature flags, where a lot of times we're doing deployments to production of apps, and then we're actually hiding new features behind what we call feature flags, and that allows us to do a deployment that is decoupled from the actual feature that we're delivering, and then we can turn that on through an environment variable or through user settings, those sorts of things. So one interesting thing to note is that Heroku is actually building the stuff that you've seen in Matt's demo, the dashboard, the other tools like the add-on catalog. They're building that stuff using this pipeline themselves. So drinking their own champagne, and it's, as Matt said at the beginning, it's a platform built by developers for developers, and I think that's definitely shines with the pipelines. The pipelines are a phenomenal feature that just went GA, and make it really easy to test and deploy changes with a workflow that is centric to our source control workflows. So then you also saw in there Heroku Enterprise. And Heroku Enterprise, what it is essentially what it says, the enterprise version of Heroku. It brings together things that enterprises need. Heroku started with just really simple, I'm going to deploy an app from Git, and I'm just a single user, or maybe a couple people on a team doing that. And now there's so many enterprises using Heroku that we had to add some additional features to support the enterprise. So things like collaboration, control, and confidence are the key kind of feature areas of Heroku Enterprise. So allowing us to establish teams that have access to a grouping of apps, and then different control parameters. So maybe some users can do that promotion to production and others can't. Maybe some users can access certain apps and others can't. And that's audit logging. Those are things that enterprises need for their deployment infrastructure, and that's what Heroku Enterprise provides. So then the last thing that you saw from Matt was Heroku Private Spaces, and that's where we want to dive in further, since that's what this webinar is ultimately about today, is the private spaces. And like the tagline there says, what Heroku Private Spaces is your own private Heroku, but delivered as a service. So it's providing you with the Heroku experience, all those things that you saw, but doing it in a space that is yours. So it's not a space that's shared with other Heroku users like the common runtime is. You don't have to worry about noisy neighbors and the potential security implications of running on the same virtualized infrastructure as others. With Heroku Private Spaces, you have your own Heroku environment that's being managed by Heroku and then being exposed to you, just like the standard Heroku. It is standard Heroku, just in a private space. So a few different aspects to private spaces. There's the dedicated runtimes, and that is the isolation, the way to have isolation from the other Heroku customers. There's the different regions, and Matt showed you those, and there are definitely more coming as well. But this allows us to spin up a private space in any of those regions that are currently supported. Network controls. This allows us to now control the access that our Heroku applications and Heroku add-ons have, and this is both for inbound and outbound. And I'm going to show you more of that in the context of Salesforce in a few minutes. And then the private data services. So when you're using the common runtime on Heroku, your application is public, meaning the endpoint is not locked down in any way. And then also the resources that are provisioned for that application are also publicly available. Of course, they're locked down through credentials and locked down with transport security, but they are on the public internet. And so that's in the common runtime. With private spaces, now you can actually have network isolation for your data services, which is really great, and we're going to go more into that. So before we go into that, I did want to talk about some of the integration scenarios for Salesforce and Heroku, because this tees up one reason for why we'd use private spaces with Salesforce. So there's 4 different integration scenarios that we often see for integrating Salesforce and Heroku. Data replication, this can be used for data warehouses. It is usually done through synchronization. It could also be done through extract, transform, and load. And there's all sorts of different use cases for why you want to do data replication. One use case would be that I have Salesforce, and it has, let's say, a product catalog living in Salesforce, and I then have a public website that's running on Heroku, and I need to expose that product catalog out to that public website. But I don't want every time somebody comes to my product catalog on my public website, I don't want that to have to make a request back to Salesforce, especially if I'm getting millions of views a day. So the data replication allows us to keep a copy of that data that's in Salesforce in sync into a data store that can then be used by the Heroku app. And I'll talk more in a second about the different ways that we can actually do that. Data aggregation or data proxying is the ability to proxy data in either direction. So let's say we have some data in Heroku, in a Heroku database, and we want to expose that database to Salesforce so that you can do reports, and you can Salesforce users can go in and see that data that actually lives in a Heroku data source. We would use data aggregation or data proxying for that. Another type of integration is user interface integration, and with user interface integration, we are integrating a user interface actually into Salesforce. So let's say we're running a UI on Heroku, we can integrate that into the Salesforce UI, and there's a couple different ways to do that, or we could do it the other way as well. And then RPC, this is using Heroku to handle like long-running or process-intensive jobs on Heroku. So an example of this would be, let's say that that Salesforce users are uploading images to Salesforce, and then I need to do something with those images. Let's say I want to do something really complex, like analyze the contents of the image. To do that, a great way to do that would be to actually, every time a new image is uploaded to Salesforce, make a call to a Heroku app to do that heavy processing on that data, and then of course I could store the result back into Salesforce. So those are different integration scenarios that we see, and then here's some different integration methods. So Heroku Connect is a product that does data replication and data proxying between Salesforce and Heroku. So we can do bidirectional or unidirectional synchronization of data from Salesforce into a Heroku Postgres database. This gives us a SQL interface to that data, so then we can do typical SQL relational joins across data, and that data is synchronized. So what that means is that we can have that app on Heroku that's serving the millions of views with product data that's actually coming from Salesforce, and we're not having to make requests back to Salesforce every single time somebody views that product data. And because it's bidirectional, let's say we wanted to have likes on those products, allowing end users on our Heroku app to actually like a product and then store that like information back into Salesforce. We can do that because it supports bidirectional sync. Heroku Connect also has a way to do data proxying, and this plays into the next one, which is Lightning Connect. So Lightning Connect is a way to bring external data into Salesforce, but not do it as a synchronization. Instead, do it as a proxy. The benefit of doing this is that it's always in sync. There's no background sync process. It is fetched on demand from the data source. And Lightning Connect can work with Heroku Connect, so with a Heroku Postgres database. It can work with any OData data source. It can work with any REST service. So if you have a REST service on Heroku and you want to expose that RESTful data into Salesforce, you can use Lightning Connect with what they call custom Apex adapters to actually then pull that data into the Salesforce UI. So then the Salesforce users can get access to that data that is on Heroku. There's different models for how security is handled with those. You can also, of course, just use the Salesforce REST APIs from Heroku, and lots of people do that, allowing you to read and access data from a Heroku app, and so that's a great way to go. Webhooks or callouts or Apex callouts are a way to do the RPC style of integration, where we're actually, based on an event in Salesforce, making a call to a Heroku app with a payload about that event, and then allowing Heroku to process that data in some way, and then possibly using Heroku Connect or the REST APIs to store the result of that operation back into Salesforce. So a number of different methods there for how we do integration. We are working on a trailhead that will go through all these in much more depth, so watch out for that on trailhead.salesforce.com, and then you can learn a lot more in depth about each of those. There is a Heroku Connect project in Trailhead now where you can actually get started with Heroku Connect and deploy an app on Heroku that uses Heroku Connect. So that is in Trailhead today. So those are great ways to learn more about this. Okay, so now how does all this relate to what we learned about private spaces? What I want to do is jump into my browser and go into the Heroku dashboard, and I want to show you a couple things about private spaces that really come in handy when we're doing these Salesforce Heroku integrations. So I have a space here that I'm going to go into. Let's go into the Hello Morton San space, and you can see there's access controls. This is the Heroku Enterprise stuff that we talked about, provide access controls, and that works, of course, in the private space. Every space has a name, has a region, and now we have the way to control the network isolation of everything that lives in this space. So everything that lives in this space would be my apps, as well as my add-ons that have been provisioned into this space as well. So the trusted IPs are external IPs that are allowed to connect to my dynos. You'll see that the default there is just wide open, so this means that any external app can make a call to my dyno. Of course, I could lock this down to specific IPs if I wanted to. But then there's also space outbound IPs, and these are the IP addresses that request from my private space. So if I'm going to make a call from an app in my private space out to another service, let's say Salesforce, then these are the IP addresses that are going to that request will originate from. So where this really comes in handy is with Salesforce, I can lock down access to users based on IP addresses. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Setup in Salesforce and just give you a quick overview of how we would do this. So often when you're building a integration between Heroku and Salesforce, you'll do this through an integration user. So you'll have a user in Salesforce that actually is going to be making these calls to Salesforce. That'll be the authentication that will be making the calls through. So let's say that that's our authenticated website profile is what that user in Salesforce, that integration user, is using. You'll see down here there is a way to set the login IP ranges for this user profile. So if I wanted to lock it down so that the only way the integration user could connect to Salesforce is from these IPs that are specific to this private space on Heroku, I could just come in here and start putting in those different IP ranges. And do not cover, it's telling me, hey, it's not going to allow me, my current user, to, and that's okay. I could just click that box and say, yep, that's fine. And then I would want to add all 4 of those IP addresses there, but then this profile would be locked down so that anyone in that user profile could only connect from the Heroku private space, and that's definitely something that we would want to do when we're integrating a Heroku app with a app on with Salesforce. That provides us a really nice network isolation that makes it so we don't have to worry about malicious users trying to connect to that Salesforce org through that integration user. So that's the basics for how we would use private spaces to control network security with our Salesforce orgs. And then we could certainly use the same construct with other services as well. IP-based security is a great way to create tiered security, and that's really what we want. Is we don't want to have one single tier of security. We want to have many tiers of security. In this case, with private spaces, one of our tiers would be the network access controls, and then another tier would be like login credentials and that sort of thing. So, so we want to create multiple tiers to keep everything nice and secure. Okay, so that's our basics there on how we use private spaces with Salesforce orgs to lock down security of those orgs. Okay, so Matt, did I miss anything?
Oh boy, we have some really great questions, like insanely good questions.
Awesome. Well, it's a good thing we have 10 minutes left for questions, so we will start going through those. So give us a second while we look into the questions that have been coming in, and feel free to send more in. We'll try to get through as many as we can. And also, please send us your feedback on this webinar. There's a bit.ly link there where you can send us the feedback. Okay, Matt, did any questions stick out? Oh. Yes, of course, on private spaces as well.
So James, maybe while you're catching up, I'll spin through and answer a couple of these.
Sounds great.
Okay, so one of the questions that we got was how do you determine the number of processes that are created in a development app? And this is a great question because enterprise apps especially tend to be complex. They have lots of running processes, workers, cron jobs, your web process, and the person who asked this question said, do you launch one of each based on the proc file? So of course you're still going to have your proc file, and that's where you're going to define your different process types, but the app.json lets you specify which of those process types fire up when you have a review app. So if you have a review app and you don't want all your process types to run, the app.json is where you can limit that. And the other cool thing about the app.json is you can use it to describe or to define an initialization script, so a script that's run when the review app launches. And the app.json isn't limited just to review apps. It lets you also add Heroku buttons to your repos, which you saw on my repo for jog, let you just deploy the application with one click. So that initialization script is my answer to another question, which is like, how would you seed a database in a review app, which is something that you need to do almost all the time. You have that kind of initial migration. And so that's something that you would run from the app.json file. You could define that. You really don't even need a separate process for that, although you could, of course, define one and then run that. It's probably simpler just to use the initialization script. Another question here. James, you getting caught up?
Yep. I've got some good ones here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is a private space essentially the ability to easily manage applications? This question came in before James kind of walked us through private spaces, so I'm hopeful that he answered this. But just to expand on it a little bit, you can do a lot more with a private space than just just make it secure. Private spaces allow you to do things like support modern architectures like microservices through dyno-to-dyno communication. They let you have you can use the inbound IP and static outbound IP restrictions to peer to private spaces and synchronize databases across region, which is the answer to another question. And so there's definitely a lot more to private spaces than just security, although security is a big part of it.
Cool. Question here, is Lightning Connect now called Salesforce Connect? Yeah, and I screwed that up. I think that was just renamed recently. So Lightning Connect and Salesforce Connect are the same product, just with different names. And I guess that was done to not confuse Lightning Connect with Lightning Components and the Lightning Desktop. There's another question about pricing on all of this. I'm sure that many of you on the webinar are Salesforce customers, and so you're wondering, like, this looks great. How do I get this awesome Heroku stuff, and what is it going to cost me? And I, as an evangelist, honestly don't know. I know that you can contact your account representative at Salesforce, and they will know. So,
yeah.
So sorry, I don't know the pricing on that. Pretty much everything that we showed today on the Heroku side can be done for free to get started on just a regular developer account. So if you want to start actually playing with this stuff, just go dive in today. As I mentioned before, the Heroku Connect project on Trailhead would be a great way to actually get started doing a lot of this. The private spaces are something. And free, yeah. The Heroku Connect Trailhead you can do for free. There's nothing in there. Private spaces, because there is a significant amount of resources being provisioned for a private space, that's not something that you can do for free. But everything that's in a private space you can do on a free developer account on Heroku.
Not free, what?
Yeah, except for the IP restrictions. So. Yeah.
So I take another one. When doing a deploy, the Git repo is not updated, only the slug. This is true. What's the reason for this? Well, there's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, one of the reasons is that Heroku shouldn't be your single source of truth. While Heroku leverages Git, it's GitHub in this case, the example that I showed you, is really your central source of truth, and you don't want to be using both of those things at the same time. You don't want people cloning the Git repository that is the source of your application on Heroku, and then working with that alongside GitHub. If you're using only a Git-based flow on your local machine and you're pushing to Heroku, then of course that Git repo is going to stay up to date. And when you look at those production applications, the one that we were promoting from staging to into our private spaces, well, that slug is simply being moved from staging to production. And there's a lot of good reasons that happens. One, it's much faster. The build process is already played out, and we can just move that slug over, and there's almost zero downtime there. If you have more than one instance of your application running, we showed you that when we scaled up to 5, you have no downtime. So as clients disconnect, we move them over to a new dyno. And this is also important because I lost my train of thought.
That's okay, because I have another question.
Hit me.
Which is, Are Heroku Connect queries not counted towards the API limits on Salesforce? And that is true. They're not counted. The Heroku Connect API calls do not count against your Salesforce API limits. So that's a nice benefit of Heroku Connect. And then, of course, when you make a SQL query to Heroku Connect's database, Heroku Postgres, that's not going to have any impact on your API limits as well.
Nice save. Okay, I figured I remembered where I was going with
Awesome.
this. The thing about that build process is you're often dependent on things like package managers. So in Node's case, it's npm. And what you really don't want to happen is you don't want your shift from staging to production to involve a failure to grab a package somewhere, and that resulting in your the prod version of your application being down. And so that never happens when you transfer a slug. The slug is a completely compiled version of your code, and it just moves over. And so you kind of know that's going to work. All right. Glad I got through that.
Good job. Okay, I wanted to actually show something real quick. So there was a question about rollbacks, and let me go try to find an app here that has multiple releases. Wow, and I totally forgot to scale down this app a long time ago. Sorry, Heroku, I'm just wasting resources.
I'm telling.
Okay, so this is just some random app here, and you'll see that I'm looking at my activity feed for this application, and you'll see different releases it's showing me here in my activity feed. There was an initial one, another V2 for Logplex, and then V3. So absolutely, if you roll something out to a production app or really any application, and then you realize, oh, I need to roll back. The V4 was bad. I want to roll back to V3. Then one of the ways to do that is just to click this button. You can also do that through a command line or a couple different other ways through the dashboard. But absolutely, rollbacks are supported. And you'll notice that what happened was it actually created a new version. So when I roll back, it created a new version, not that is pointing to the previous version 3's slug file. So yep, rollbacks are certainly supported on Heroku.
And another quick answer to a question there, you can see that database was added as a resource. One of the questions that we had is, does attaching a database or any other add-on require code level changes? And the answer to that should normally be no. Attaching an add-on is going to give you that. It's going to add that configuration variable to your environment. That's going to be available to your code base. And unless you're unless you're currently hard coding things like credentials and database URLs, which of course you definitely don't want to do, then you should be able to just pull those out of the environment, pass them into whichever libraries you're using, and away you go. If you are currently storing credentials in your code base, well, don't do that.
Good advice. There's a question here about webhooks. I did mention webhooks, and a slide said webhooks, and I didn't take the time to explain that very well. So webhooks are a way to provide an application with a URL, and then you can set event handlers that the way that the event is handled is by making an HTTP call to that URL with the payload about the event. So these are used often in systems like GitHub uses webhooks. So if you want an application to know every time a commit is added to a repo on GitHub, you can set a webhook to do that. And so Salesforce doesn't have native support for what we would call webhooks, but that you can do essentially the same thing through triggers with Apex and then a call out, or through workflow with an outbound message. So those are two different ways to do that, and the trailhead that we're working on will go into a lot more detail about those two different methods. There also is a little tool that I created to create webhooks on Salesforce, but all that is really doing is actually creating a Apex trigger for you with the HTTP callout. So yep, that's what webhooks are.
Is that project on GitHub? Or
It is. Yep. If you just search for like Salesforce webhooks, then I'm sure that there we go. First result for that would be my blog post with video and GitHub and Heroku app and all that kind of stuff. So, yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Another question, do we still support updates on private spaces? This is in reference to things like the status page. The status.heroku.com tells you which services are up or down, and the answer is absolutely yes. Now Another quick question, should pipelines be used as a release management solution? If yes, can a user reject an app in staging? In the flow that I showed you, it's probably not how things would work. You'd probably look at a PR. That PR would have a review app associated with it, so you'd actually be able to see that code running, and then at that point you'd be able to kind of discuss whether that's something that should be merged into staging and therefore deployed to staging. GitHub has its own set of permissions that allow you to limit who can do that. But let's just say they did deploy it to staging. That's no big deal because Heroku gives you control over who can deploy to production. And so, as James showed you, it's really easy to roll back your staging environment, sort of voiding their merge. And of course, you could go into GitHub and then revert it. So a kind of a yes, no, maybe answer. I apologize, but.
It's a very flexible platform. If all else fails, you can use the Heroku APIs to basically do anything you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, we are out of time. Hopefully we got to your questions. If not, feel free to send us a tweet. I'm _James Ward on Twitter. And Matt Krieger, you are what on Twitter?
Matt_Krieger.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. Please provide us your feedback and look forward to seeing you on another webinar soon. Thanks.
Cheers, folks. Have a good one.